Father Mark Wagner, again wishing all of my parishioners of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish a happy Easter season. I'm trying to share with you some aspects of our faith, sometimes from the Bible, from the revelation of the Word of God, and sometimes, particularly on Saturdays, since Saturdays are dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, I want to speak a little bit about the Blessed Mother and how she has appeared in what are called private revelations, when she appears to different people in the world, apparitions in different countries. 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, I spoke about how Our Lady appeared in Rwanda. In the 1980s, she appeared in a place called Kubeko and warned the people about a terrible genocide that was going to happen. And sure enough, in 1994, there was the genocide that happened in that country. Several people were saved, however, as we heard. For example, this young lady, Immaculée, who survived by hiding in a small bathroom for 3 months with several other people in this very crowded little tiny room. But she kept her sanity and kept her faith alive by praying the rosary. And so we spoke about maybe binging on the rosary during this time of pandemic when we are in our houses and we have time to do extra prayer. And then last Saturday, I spoke about how Our Lady appeared at a place called Monteberico in Italy to tell the people how to free themselves and save themselves from a terrible plague, a contagious epidemic that had killed many people in that part of Italy for over 20 years. And but as soon as they listened to Our Lady's words, asking that they build a church on that mountain, Monteberico, the plague immediately ceased. Well, today I'd like to tell the story of an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary that actually happened in Wisconsin. It's the only approved apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary that ever happened in the United States of America. It happened in a place near Champion, Wisconsin, and I had the joy and privilege actually last fall of going. I went to a conference in Chicago and I was able to go visit that shrine, and so I want to tell the story about Our Lady of Good Help. You know, the Church is very careful before approving these kinds of private revelations. In fact, it usually takes a long time. This one happened in 1859, and the official approval of the apparition only happened recently. In the year 2010, the bishop of that region of Green Bay, Wisconsin, approved the apparition. Before I tell the story of the apparition of Our Lady of Good Help, I'll just say the 3 things about why I really believe that this apparition is authentic. Having studied and learned about different apparitions, I know that there are certain marks of authenticity or certain, signs of believability or credibility in these apparitions of Our Lady. And the first is that it has to do with the Immaculate Conception. If you know anything about all of the modern apparitions of Our Lady and also the lives of many of the great saints of the 20th century, the Blessed Virgin Mary often has spoken to her beloved saints about this great privilege that she had of being immaculately conceived. And this is just a very important dogma that the Church recently declared. Actually, in 1854 it was declared. And then in 1858, we know, a few years later, that's when the Blessed Mother appeared in Lourdes and appeared every day for 2 weeks to St. Bernadette. And finally, in the last apparition of the 2 weeks, Our Lady said her name, finally, after Bernadette asked her many times. She said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." And Bernadette, being a simple, uneducated young girl, the priests were very impressed that she was even able to repeat that long, complicated theological phrase. And in any case, it was a real confirmation of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. Well, the apparition to St. Bernadette occurred in 1858, and the apparition in Wisconsin occurred only 1 year later, in the year 1859. And it is also just a few years after the bishops of the United States declared that the patron saint of the United States would be the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it just makes sense that, since the country, our country consecrated ourselves to the Immaculate Conception, that we would get a visit, perhaps from Our Lady, the year after the apparitions of Lourdes. A second thing that really convinces me of the authenticity of the apparitions of Our Lady of Good Help is because this apparition, like all of the authentic apparitions, happened to a humble person who was self-effacing, who was humble, and who was docile and deferential toward the church and the authority of the church, and went to a priest or a spiritual director to make sure that this was something from God, and in order to be not self-deluded in some way. It wasn't a case of someone really kind of going around promoting themselves or promoting the apparition themselves. And finally, a third thing that really convinces me of this apparition was the fact that Our Lady did warn the people that they needed to convert from their sins in that early days, the pioneer days of our country, and that the warnings were real, and a devastating disaster actually befell that part of the country just a few years later. So let me get into the story of the apparition. Our Lady appeared to a young lady named Marie Adele Joseph Brees, B-R-I-S-E. And this young lady came with her family. They were immigrants from Belgium. She was born in 1831 and lived in a Catholic region of Belgium. And so when she was a young girl, she wanted to become a sister, wanted to become a nun. She had the idea of joining the Ursuline sisters in a convent in Belgium. But just about that time, her family was moving to the United States. And she had this question whether she should stay with her family and help her family and her siblings, help her parents, or if she should enter the convent. And she went to a spiritual director, precisely a priest, and she got the advice that she should be with her family and that she should go with them to the United States. Like many of the Belgian immigrants who arrived in that part of Wisconsin at that time, Adele's parents, Lambert and Marie Brees, wanted to purchase land that was covered with trees. The thought of many European people was that trees on a piece of land represent wealth. In Europe, it was seen as something valuable. You could cut the trees, you could build things with trees. Forested land was considered something precious and valuable in Europe. However, in the United States, parcels of land that were covered with trees were pretty much a dime a dozen. And they soon discovered that the trees on a parcel of land in the United States was sometimes more of a disadvantage than an advantage when they were buying property. However, it is true that in that region of Wisconsin at that time, the economy of the area was definitely a tree economy. Everything was based on cutting trees, logging, lumber, selling wood, and also clearing forested land in order to put in farmland. And the economy involved all of the things necessary for cutting trees, for clearing land, and also one of the ways in which the land was cleared was by burning the brush and the forest and the land. Sometimes they would just burn the trees in order to create farmland. And all of these things that I'm mentioning now are very much part of the story of Our Lady of Good Help and her apparition to Adele Brees. In fact, I find that each of the different apparitions of Our Lady are very unique, and there's something unique about each one. For example, I find that Our Lady of Fatima, when she appeared in Portugal, that apparition was really all about light. There was flashes of light. There was light shining through her gown. There was light shining through her hands. And of course, the great miracle of the sun. So it's really light was very much part of the visions of Our Lady of Fatima. At Lourdes, however, Our Lady does not come out of the sky. She came out of the earth, out of a cave, a grotto. And so really Lourdes was, to me it was all about earth and then of course water. That miraculous spring that came springing out of the mud, out of the dirt, and this wonderful pure spring that caused so many miraculous cures. Well, I think the apparition of Our Lady of Good Help also has a particular sort of a hallmark or an aspect, And the aspect of this apparition to me seems to be all about trees and all about wood. So we're going to see that as we tell the story of Our Lady of Good Help. The Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to Adele Brees on October 9th, 1859, while she was walking actually at the time through a very thick forest. She was walking on an Indian trail, an old Indian trail through the woods, with a sack of grain on her head. She was going from her family home to a grist mill, a mill where they would grind the grain for making flour. Adele obviously was doing those things that she had committed herself to do. Her spiritual director back in Belgium when she was younger, 4 years before in Belgium, had recommended that she not enter the convent as she wanted to, as some of her friends had entered the convent, but rather that she stay with her family and do those kinds of tasks that would help them. And so she was faithful in her duties and her chores, such as walking through that forest on that day. So now I'll read the ancient description of how the apparition occurred. She was going to the grist mill with a sack of wheat on her head. As Adele came to the place, she saw a lady, all in white, standing between two trees, one a maple and the other a hemlock. Adele was frightened and stood still. The vision slowly disappeared, leaving a white cloud after it. Adele continued on her errand and returned home without seeing anything more. So the first apparition, there were actually 3 apparitions, and the Blessed Mother only spoke in the 3rd apparition. But in this first apparition, Our Lady just appeared, and Adele went home and spoke to her parents about it and talked about what she saw, and the parents were amazed at this, and they kind of said, they suggested that maybe it's a soul from purgatory, they said, that's asking for prayers or something like that. Well, the story continues that on the following Sunday, a few days later, Adele had to pass again through that same way. And she was going to Mass on Sunday to a place called Bay Settlement, which is about 11 miles from her home. And this time she was not alone. She was accompanied by her sister Isabel and a neighbor woman named Mrs. Vander Niesen. And when they came to the place near those 2 trees where Our Lady had appeared before, between the 2 trees, the same lady in white was at the place where Adele had seen her before. Adele was again frightened, and they said that almost in a tone of reproach, she was kind of afraid or annoyed by this. She said, "Oh, there is that lady again." So she was kind of afraid. Adele had not the courage to go on, so she stopped. The other 2 did not see anything, but they could tell by Adele's look that she was afraid. They thought, too, that it might be a poor soul that needed prayers. So the 2 friends also thought that somehow this might be a soul from purgatory, some sort of ghost that was appearing to her. They waited a few minutes, and then Adele told them that it was gone. It had disappeared as the first time, and all she could see was a little mist or a white cloud in the place where the vision had been. So then Adele went to Mass, and after Mass she went to confession, and she told the priest, the confessor, about this and how she had been frightened by seeing this lady in white. And the priest, Father William Verhol, told her not to be afraid and to speak to him later outside of the confession. And so she went to him and she told him about this heavenly vision. And he said that if it was from heaven, if it was a heavenly messenger, and that she would see it again and that it would not harm her. And that she should ask in God's name who it was and what it desired of her. And so this encouraged Adele, and she wasn't as afraid. She started home with her two companions, and then there was a man who had joined them, another man who was a man who was clearing land for the Holy Cross Fathers at Bay Settlement. So a man who was a lumberjack and working in the typical industry of that area. So there were four of them walking again through this woods on this Indian path, and as they approached the hallowed spot, Adele could see the beautiful lady, clothed in dazzling white, with a yellow sash around her waist. Her dress fell to her feet in graceful folds. She had a crown of stars around her head, and her long, golden, wavy hair fell loosely around her shoulders. Such a heavenly light shone around her that Adele could hardly look back at her sweet face. Overcome with this heavenly light and the beauty of her amiable visitor, Adele fell on her knees. And here is a description of the dialogue between Our Lady, the Blessed Mother, and Adele. Adele first asked, "In God's name, who are you, and what do you want of me?" So she said what the priest had told her to say to the vision. And the response came from the lady, "I am the Queen of Heaven, who prays for the conversion of sinners. And I wish you to do the same. You received Holy Communion this morning, and that is well. But you must do more. Make a general confession and offer communion for the conversion of sinners. If they do not convert and do penance, my son will be obliged to punish them." One of the women who was with her asked, "Adele, who is it?" "Oh, why can't we see her as you do?" said the other one, weeping. But Adele answered by saying, "Kneel. The lady says she is the Queen of Heaven." And so the others knelt down, and it says, Our Lady, our Blessed Lady, turned and looked kindly at them and said, "Blessed are they that believe without seeing." And then she spoke again to Adele. "What are you doing here in idleness, while your companions are working in the vineyard of my son?" "What more can I do, dear lady?" said Adele, weeping. "Gather the children in this wild country and teach them what they should know for salvation." And Adele answered, "But how shall I teach them who know so little myself?" Our Lady responded, "Teach them their catechism, how to sign themselves with the sign of the cross, and how to approach the sacraments. That is what I wish you to do. Go and fear nothing. I will help you." What beautiful, encouraging words for this young lady who had wanted to become a sister, become a nun, and she was kind of maybe feeling guilty that her companions in Belgium had entered the Ursuline convent and were working in the vineyard of the Lord, as Our Lady said. And Our Lady was encouraging Adele to do more, right? To become holy, to sanctify herself, to recognize her sinfulness, to do a general confession. She said, "You've received communion, that's good, but you can do so much more." Of course, in every country, and apparently here in the 19th century in America, there were people who were maybe too busy farming or doing their material work to go to church. And so Our Lady was warning the people and telling Adele that urgently she should try to tell the people to convert. As I mentioned, I was able last fall to visit the shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, and if you go there you will see that it's a very simple place out in the middle of the farmland in Wisconsin. It's very flat. There's not many trees as there was at the time of Adele. It was a forested area, but now it's all farmland. There's a very simple small church there, a chapel, and below the chapel there is a underground chapel or a crypt, which is the actual place where the apparition actually occurred. Outside the church there is a small cemetery where Adele herself is buried, and it's a 5-acre area which is surrounded by a white picket fence. And there's a small museum, a gift shop, and a large meeting room for retreats and gatherings. And it is interesting that in the only approved apparition that occurred in the United States, that the Blessed Virgin Mary would say something like this to Adele. She said, "Teach the children of this wild country." So we see the need for catechesis, especially in the pioneer territories. Perhaps a lot of the children and a lot of the families living out in the countryside or in the forests and the woods, and the children were growing up perhaps in like wild like animals or without religion. So busy clearing the land and trying to farm that they perhaps did not go to church, did not pay attention to their religious duties, and were caught up in certain sins. So much so that Our Lady urgently asked Adele to pray. And she said, "I am the Queen of Heaven who prays for the conversion of sinners, and I wish you to do the same." And she says, "Offer communion for the conversion of sinners. If they do not convert and do penance, my Son will be obliged to punish them." And we know that this was perhaps an allusion to the fact that 12 years later came a terrible, one of the worst natural disasters of the history of the United States came to that region. And Our Lady was perhaps warning the people about that. But Our Lady is telling Adele to offer communion for the conversion of sinners. And so there's something obviously that lay people can do once we're finished with this pandemic and the churches open up again. To be able to receive communion is one of the greatest gifts that we have. And when Jesus is in our hearts, that is when we can really pray effectively for sinners. And we also see in this apparition that Adele was a little bit like all of us. A lot of us feel perhaps inadequate, like we are not worthy or we're not capable of doing those things like teaching other people, teaching catechism. People are shy or don't want to volunteer to do those things. And Adele said, how can I teach them, the children, who know so little myself? And the Blessed Mother gently encouraged her and told her that obviously you're an adult, they are children, you can teach them those simple things. She said, teach them their catechism, how to make the sign of the cross, how to approach the sacraments. That is what I wish you to do. And she concluded by those beautiful words, "Go and fear nothing. I will be with you." And Adele did indeed go. Encouraged by Our Lady, she began a ministry. She started going house to house within a 50-mile radius. Adele started to do what Our Lady had asked her, to gather and to teach the children of this wild country. She would actually go to homes or homesteads, and she would knock on the door and offer to do housework or to clean or cook or do tasks around the house in exchange, not for money, but for the privilege of teaching their children, the children of the home, the catechism of the church. So there were many Catholic immigrants in that region, so she would go to these homes and teach them their Catholic faith. Eventually, other women joined Adele in this work, and she started a little congregation. And like many places in the world, sometimes women at that time would wear religious habits or dress as religious sisters. They would take private vows, even though they had no possibility perhaps of joining a religious congregation. They lived and dressed like religious sisters, and so she had this little community that was helping her to teach the children. One particularly beautiful detail of the apparition is the fact that within a few months after the apparition, Adele's own father helped in constructing a small chapel on the side of the trail there, next to the two trees where Our Lady had appeared. And this little detail seems to me very precious because it shows two things. First of all, you've got that image of wood next to those two trees. You've got this little chapel made of logs, like a log cabin. And you've got these men like Adele's father who are lumberjacks, and that is their business. And here they are immediately going to work building a chapel in honor of Our Lady. Adele was fortunate in that way because not all of the visionaries of these various apparitions enjoyed the help and the support of their parents. We know the parents of the children of the apparitions of Fatima and also of Lourdes, St. Bernadette's parents. At first they were opposed and they couldn't believe the story of the apparition. But Adele had her father himself building this little chapel. And what a beautiful image also of helping, the idea of supporting and helping someone well, to carry their cross, to carry the wood of the cross. Adele's father was willing to help. And that brings us, of course, perhaps to the unusual name that this apparition has, Our Lady of Good Help. Why is it that it is called Our Lady of Good Help? Well, this is because Adele and her family were from Belgium, and Belgium was a place where in Belgium and in France there was a devotion ever since actually the 11th century. There was a devotion called Notre Dame de Bon Secours, Our Lady of Good Help, and it was an appellation or a title of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which was invoked especially to ask for Mary's help, the help of the powerful Queen of Heaven, to help in times of revolution and war and plague and pestilence. It was popular in the Middle Ages. You had the problems of the Black Plague, kind of like what we have now with the coronavirus. In particular in France, there was a place in Lorraine in northeastern France, in Nancy, the city of Nancy, where a chapel, a shrine was built in honor of Our Lady of Good Help. But also in Belgium, there were several churches built in honor of Our Lady of Good Help. For me, it is very interesting that the family of Adele Brees, when they lived in Belgium, and her birthplace was about 60 miles from a city named Peruwelz, Belgium. And this place was the most famous shrine to Our Lady of Good Help in all of Belgium. So they certainly would have known about it. It was a place famous because in the 17th century there was a famous oak tree that was situated exactly on the border between France and Belgium. And it was between two forests, the Bois de Condé, which was in France, and the Bois de Blaton, which was in Belgium. And so this oak tree was quite famous kind of as a landmark or a marker between on the border there. And so it was a way for them to travel. Well, this big oak tree, in the trunk of the tree, there was a hollow or a little niche or an alcove, and someone placed a small wooden statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary carved from oak wood. And so when the travelers would pass by, they would pray there, and they soon began to experience miracles. Our Lady apparently gave great blessings through this place and this little statue, and it became quite famous. And it became known as Notre Dame du Chêne d'Entre-deux-Bois, which means Our Lady of the Oak Tree between the two woods, in the sense of two forests. But this became mistranslated into English, and I've seen this mistranslation on the internet. sometimes it's been called Our Lady Between the Two Oak Trees, because the word bois can mean in French wood or woods, like a forest, or it can be something made of wood. And so you can understand this mistranslation. And so perhaps that kind of explains the detail that the Blessed Virgin Mary in Champion, Wisconsin appeared between two oak trees, perhaps in a way that would be kind of understandable or familiar to Adele. Mary, perhaps in her sensitive way, wanted to appear to Adele in a way that she could appreciate and understand. However, this place of Perewelts became a very famous sanctuary. They started building hotels and restaurants for the pilgrims. It soon became not just a forest, but a little town, little city called Bon Secours. It was actually called that, the little village there. And the pilgrims who went to that place had the custom of putting a stone or a rock from wherever they came from, and they began to create a pyramid of stones. Well, eventually some of the devotees and some of the local clergy realized that they should do something more for Our Lady in that place. And then in 1636, there was a epidemic, like our pandemic that we're having now with the coronavirus. There was a Black Plague epidemic in the region. And the villagers promised Our Lady that they would build a chapel instead of this pyramid of rocks that was there. And they went to work, and soon enough, in fact, the following year, in 1637, on the feast of the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Archbishop of that area consecrated the chapel, and it was renamed Our Lady of Bon Secours, Our Lady of Good Help. And as the church was being constructed, Our Lady of Good Help blessed them with an end to the Black Plague in that area. So it is perfectly understandable that as Adele described her vision of Our Lady between two trees, all of the priests and the members of her community in that region, which was the largest community of Belgian immigrants in the United States, they would have immediately thought of Our Lady of Good Help. And it's also quite understandable that they would have built that little chapel on the side of the pathway, because of the fact that in Belgium at that time, there was the custom of building little roadside shrines and chapels along the country roads in honor of Our Lady of Good Help. In the content of the apparitions themselves, there is nothing particular to indicate that Our Lady was Our Lady of Good Help. She never said that, I am Our Lady of Good Help. She didn't give her name in that way. She said, I am the Queen of Heaven, rather, instead. But nevertheless, it is interesting that the very last words of Our Lady to Adele Brees in the apparition, the last apparition, was, "Go and fear nothing, I will help you." And Our Lady did help Adele Brees in her ministry, beginning with inspiring her own father to help build the first chapel. And the help continued to come in. There were other helpers that came. She was helped by other women, other ladies who helped in the work of teaching the children of the region. And also they were able, within 10 years, to build a school so that they could accomplish Our Lady's wish of gathering the children to teach them the catechism. And so by the year 1869, a small school was established called St. Mary's Academy. However, Adele did need Our Lady's help as the years went on, because there were a lot of tribulations, financial difficulties, there was opposition from various people, and several times the school had to be closed. But then with Adele's great trust and confidence in Our Lady, she never panicked, she never lost her confidence or faith, and eventually whatever donations or whatever food or whatever help or assistance was needed always came, and the school was once again opened and the mission could continue. But certainly the greatest example of Our Lady helping Adele Brees and her little church and mission and school there at Champion, Wisconsin, was 12 years after the apparitions. In the year 1871, the greatest natural disaster in the history of the United States struck this region of Wisconsin. And it was called the Peshtigo Fire. In 1870, in the winter, there was very little precipitation, and then throughout the summer and fall, there was only 1 inch of rain in the region of Wisconsin and the Green Bay Peninsula, and the result was this horrible fire. 1.2 million acres were destroyed. That is 1,875 square miles. About 12 small towns were destroyed, the largest of which was the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin. And it is estimated that in the entire region, perhaps as many as 2,500 persons were killed. The exact number of deaths will never be known because in all of those little towns, all of the city records were destroyed. The Peshtigo fire is sometimes called the Forgotten Fire because it happened on October 8th, 1871, the very same day as the Great Chicago Fire, a few hundred miles away. In the Great Chicago Fire, perhaps 250 people were killed, whereas in the Peshtigo Fire, again, as many as 2,500 people were killed. This fire was obviously caused by those drought conditions, but it was also caused by the fact that in that area of Wisconsin, the practice continued of clearing the land, first with logging, cutting down the trees, but then using fires, small fires, to burn away the brush and the rest of the trees. In fact, during the days just before the Great Fire of October 8th, it is said that there was so much smoke in the air that a lighthouse on Lake Michigan there, called the Green Island Light, was kept continuously lit and shining both day and night to guide the ships that were passing by. All that was needed for these many small fires throughout Wisconsin to become one great firestorm, the Peshtigo Fire, was a strong wind. And sure enough, that is what happened. On the 8th of October, 1871, in the evening, the vigil of the apparition of Our Lady of Good Help, which had occurred 12 years earlier. It was a cold front that moved in from the west, bringing strong winds that fanned the flames out of control. On the internet, you can find any number of videos and descriptions of the horrors of the Peshtigo Fire. It is said that the flames reached 200 feet into the air and caused trees and buildings to explode into flame, with winds 110 miles per hour or stronger. Hurricane force winds that caused this firestorm with superheated flames of at least 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Eyewitnesses say that the fire caused a firestorm or a whirl or a tornado that actually threw railway cars or houses into the air. There are horrible descriptions of the people in Peshtigo having to throw themselves into the freezing Peshtigo River and risk drowning or hypothermia. But as the flames approached the shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, Adele was joined by many of the local residents who had helped her in her ministry. People from that region came to the shrine and began praying. All night long they prayed the rosary and processed around the grounds of the shrine with Sister Adele carrying a statue of Mary. The air grew hotter and hotter as they prayed and prayed into the ghastly lit night. Suddenly, the sky grew less brilliant, and a cooler wind rushed in from the west. With the rising of the sun, it began to rain, and the rain became a downpour. They were all saved. The fire was extinguished from heaven. Afterwards, it was clear to all that a great miracle had occurred. Amidst the blackened landscape for miles around, the only oasis of green was the little area around the church, surrounded by a white picket fence. It seemed like an emerald in a sea of black. The outer portion of the fence in some places was charred black, while the inside of the fence still shone, painted white. And so once again we see in the story the wonderful help that Our Lady gives to Adele and those who gather with her. And the image of wood, that white picket fence, protecting them. Their little 5-acre area around the church was protected. And we think, of course, of the wood of the cross that protects us from evil and sin. Every year to this day at the shrine on October 8th, there is a procession with a statue of Our Lady enacting what happened on that night when Adele and the others prayed for protection from Our Lady. Pilgrims can go to the shrine, of course, to this day, and below the church itself there's a small chapel which actually has crutches and canes of people who over the years have experienced miracles of healing at the shrine. Near the altar of Our Lady, directly below the main altar, this is the spot where the 2 trees, the maple and the hemlock trees, stood, between which Our Lady appeared. Pilgrims visiting the shrine can visit this small museum, which has some artifacts and souvenirs and relics of Adele herself. There's a prayer book which often appears in photographs of Adele, which she used in prayer. Here are some pieces of the actual trees near which Our Lady appeared. There are pictures of Adele holding a cross which was made from wood from the trees near which Our Lady appeared. Our Lady of Good Help came to this country to reassure us and to comfort us, to offer her help, to warn us certainly of the seriousness of sin and its consequences. Next month is the month of May, and we will celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. And certainly we will explore this wonderful apparition in which, again, Our Lady came out of love and concern to help the children of God to convert and turn away from their sins and to avoid an even greater firestorm. She warned that if people did not convert, that there will be an even greater war. She predicted the horrors of World War II. Our Lady of Fatima explained to Lucia that war is a punishment for sin. And we know that Our Lady of Good Help said to Adele, "If the people do not convert and do penance, my son will be obliged to punish them." But of course we know that God is love, and the punishment that is referred to is simply God not being able to protect us. If we turn away from God, then certainly the result will be things like wars and disasters. God cannot protect us if we turn from Him. I have here a statue that I got last November when I visited the shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, and it shows, of course, an artist's rendition of Our Lady dressed in the flowing white robes with the yellow sash and her flowing hair. The artist made the best possible effort to depict the beauty of Our Lady as she appeared to Adele in the woods outside of Champion, Wisconsin. On my little pilgrimage from the Chicago area to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, I was accompanied by a deacon from the Diocese of Sacramento, Deacon Mark Ruiz. Deacon Mark Ruiz and I concelebrated the Sunday Mass at the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help, and afterwards we asked for recommendations from the priest and sacristan for a good place to eat some local fare. Well, they were not hesitant in recommending the Dykesville Bowl, a place where we could get their world-famous deep-fried cheese curds. Here we are. Our curds in a way. watching some football.
How long has it been since I've had one of these?
What's that?
It's been.
How is that? Look at that. That's major.
Yeah.
Get some yellow on that yellow right there.
Yeah.
Look at that. What's this?
Cheese curds.
Cheese curds. Award-winning cheese curds. The best in Wisconsin. That's right. After many years of selfless and loving service to God and to Our Lady, and especially to the children of the area of Champion, Wisconsin, Adele Brees died at the age of 66. The priest who accompanied her and gave her the last sacraments was later fond of telling the story of how edifying it was at the deathbed of Adele. In the little graveyard beside her dear chapel, Sister Adele was laid to rest. A very simple tombstone bears the following inscription in French, which we translate: "Sacred Cross, under thy shadow I rest and hope. Sister Marie Adele Joseph Bryce, died July the 5th, 1896, at the age of 66 years." And of course, it was many years later that the church finally approved the apparitions of Our Lady of Good Help. The bishop, Bishop David Rieken of Green Bay, Wisconsin, made the declaration: "I declare with moral certainty and in accord with the norms of the church that the events, apparitions, and locutions given to Adele Brees in October of 1859 do exhibit the substance of supernatural character, and I do hereby approve these apparitions as worthy of belief, though not obligatory, by the Christian faithful. Our Lady of Good Help, pray for us."